we're making DVDs of this program today, and so please sign up after we take our break so that you can receive information in the future about the DVDs or any other aspect of this program about which you may have some further questions. I am sifting through the questions, and we're going to try and get to as many of these questions as we possibly can. I'm trying to weed out the ones that are repetitive. So I will ask Commissioner Khan to go first with the series of questions that he has now while I continue to go through these questions from you, the audience.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and ask the audience questions. It's really tempting to expand and pontificate, but just for the sake of time, we want to keep the answers short and terse. There's a lot of detail that we can look up on our own, but just short, quick answers would be great. I guess this one I can ask Mike and then have Paul also comment. Any proof yet that bin Laden was responsible for September 11th?
From a criminal standpoint, in terms of the way you would approach it to court of law, which is how I approach everything, the answer is no. The case has not been made. I believe Osama bin Laden has been and remains a CIA asset and protected.
Just hold applause for 1 minute. Paul, any comments?
As you may guess from my earlier talk, I see a lot of evidence of knowledge of the attacks in Afghanistan in the months before 9/11. However, Osama bin Laden appears to be more of a kind of a spiritual figure, a symbolic leader. We can see a lot of other people who we could call masterminds who would be way ahead of the list, in my opinion, over him.
Thank you. Cynthia, do you have a question? Or do you want me to keep going?
No, keep going.
Okay. This, I guess, would be best handled by Barry. Barry, what can we, you've all pretty much ripped apart the credibility of the commissions. We've explored the illegitimacy of being dogmatic about anything you hear in the corporate mainstream media. What can we do to expose or put pressure on the corporate media to cover the 9/11 truth issue? Concrete steps.
Boy, I wish I knew. They're a huge problem, and I've been struggling with them for 3 decades. You just work. You do what you can. There are people within the media who are legitimate. They're authentic. There are fugitive paragraphs. There are excellent particular columnists and so on. And I think that people should recognize them, praise them, help them, link up with them, write letters to the editor. Simple as it seems, it's a powerful thing. The letters to the editor column of a newspaper or magazine is usually the second best thing, second best read item in that section in that paper. So those are some of the things you can do, and don't give up.
Thank you. I can't read this one. The writing is too sloppy. Sorry.
Oh, I could read it. That's why I gave it
He's a doctor.
I'm a doctor. That's a bad prognostic sign for somebody's penmanship.
Why has David Ray Graham's Griffiths, that's right, findings attacking the official version and the attack on WTC and the Pentagon not received more attention in the U.S. media?
In other words, why isn't Griffin's book receiving the press and the media attention it should receive?
Is that directed at anybody?
How about Barry?
Again, it's de facto censorship that occurs. I personally contacted twice the letters editor of the Toronto Star, it's the largest paper in Canada, drawing to his attention, his name's Dan Smith, drawing to his attention the publication of David Ray Griffin's book, that it was selling very well on Amazon, that it was extremely timely because it came out around the time of the 9/11 Commission, and I said I thought it was worth reviewing. I have yet to see a review. Way back when Charles Hyam wrote a tremendous book called Trading with the Enemy, that shows that Ford and General Motors and ITT and Sterling Drugs and others worked actively with the Nazis before and during the Second World War. He wrote a book that the libel insurance company charged one of the lowest premiums that it ever charged because it was so well documented. It's a classic to this day, hardly reviewed anywhere to this day. That book's about 20 years old. And I believe that Michael, to my left here, has made a comment a while back about it not being an accident that there are so many books that no one's heard about or that are out of print.
Great. Paul?
Yeah, I'd also like to add that in Britain, actually, his book has gotten a lot more coverage. He's been on national television. He's been mentioned in a big review in the Daily Mail, which is one of the biggest papers there. Book has done very well over there. And this is something I've seen in my research, is that often for events in the United States, we have to turn to the European media to get some decent coverage.
Thank you. It's called The New
Pearl
Pearl Harbor by David Ray Griffin.
May I add a 10-second observation to that?
Sure, Mike, please.
I described this in detail in Crossing the Rubicon because you have to establish the ecosystem in which all of this takes place. And it is a financial ecosystem in which all of the corporate media in this country trades their stock on Wall Street, governed by price-to-earnings ratios, governed by cheap energy, governed by drug cash being laundered through the banking system, governed by, in other words, when a flock of birds changes direction, is it a conspiracy or is it just because all the birds know that's their common interest, to do or not do something? And so there is that herd mentality. The way you overcome that is you make more people go listen to independent media than are listening to the mainstream media, and it makes the mainstream media jealous.
Thank you.
When you've exhausted yours.
Okay. Yeah. All right. This is a question that needs some addressing in terms of paradigm shift. And Mike, I want to ask you your opinion on this, and I guess all of you. The terrorists and bin Laden have obviously declared war on the U.S.
Is that it?
No. What do they want, number one? Wars are usually started to gain something. What do they hope to gain?
Okay. Well, first of all, I do not accept the construct that 19 Muslim hijackers perpetrated the attacks of 9/11 out of a cave in Afghanistan. What we are faced with, though, is what some people, and I don't agree with this completely, a concept called blowback, in which many of these Muslim fundamentalist organizations were deliberately created by the United States government through covert policy in the late 70s, early 80s, throughout the Afghani Soviet insurgency, where people like Zbigniew Brzezinski were, boasting about it. I mean, that's where we see radical hate books that are used in some Muslim schools having been printed at the University of Nebraska under the same contract that was printing oil drilling manuals for Unocal, which is true. By the same token, I was a policeman in South Central Los Angeles, and I will say that if you stand on anybody's neck long enough, they're going to get upset and they're going to try to fight back. That is a legitimate human right of self-defense. What anybody, I think, wants, and I'm not advocating terrorism in any form or violence in any form, but what I'm saying is that some people fight back, and certainly there were terrorists who wanted to attack the United States before 9/11. There are probably 5 times that many since 9/11, based solely upon the conduct of the United States government in world affairs since.
Thank you. I just have a comment to add to Mike's. Extremist and fundamentalist ideology has been around since the earliest centuries of the Islamic religion, of Christianity, of Judaism, of Buddhism, of Hinduism. The question I think that needs to be asked that Mike is investigating is who funds these guys, who empowers them, who gives them logistical information, and who promotes their ideology. Mike, in your opinion, is there a marriage between Wall Street, CIA, and the militant Islamic networks?
Well, first of all, the CIA is Wall Street, and Wall Street is the CIA. There is no difference. I got a whole chapter on that in the book. That's a real eye-opener. But I think I look at this historically. Congresswoman McKinney served on the House International Relations Committee, and I know that you had pretty good terms with Congressman Dana Rohrabacher of California.
Yes.
And I document a long litany where Dana Rohrabacher, absolutely incensed about how the U.S. was deliberately supporting the Taliban and al-Qaeda with arms and cutting off the arms to anybody who opposed al-Qaeda, was literally almost slamming his shoe like Nikita Khrushchev did on the table, chewing out a State Department official. He was after a guy named Carl Inderfirth, who was in my book, saying it's Pakistan, 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 meaning that the United States government, through the CIA with its relationship with the ISI, was deliberately acting as a nurse, if you will, suckling and protecting the Taliban and making sure that it grew.
Thank you. Mike, do you have any comments to add about the Osama bin Laden, the militant Islamic networks, and their commitment to declare war on the United States?
Well, I think the world is beginning to see in a little bit that there are more viewpoints in the world than the American viewpoint. And the Islamic world and the Arab world is pretty much fed up with the blind support of the United States for Israel against their interests, or what they perceive as their interests. And it was pretty clear during my time in Saudi Arabia that there was one way of looking at things, and there was the real world's way of looking at things. And since then, it's only gotten worse. John Kerry has written a remarkably anti-Arab, and I say anti-Semitic, diatribe in the August 26th edition of The Forward, in which he castigates all of the Arab world and says Israel is our only true friend, it's the only democratic state in the Middle East, and we therefore should support Israel. And you have statements like the Zelikow, who everybody was trying to get off the 9/11 Commission, saying that the United States is in Iraq and Afghanistan to protect Israel's interests. And the Arab world and the Muslim world sees this and says, these people are crazy. It's time to hit back. We don't have atomic bombs. We don't have a 600-ship Navy. And we don't have Mach 3 jet fighters. We'll use car bombs, we'll use sticks of dynamite, and we'll use airplanes, and we'll try and even the score and get these people's attention. It's kind of like the farmer who bought the world's remaining super jackass. And the thing wouldn't sit, it wouldn't walk, it wouldn't pull, it wasn't housebroken, and it was a very nasty piece of work. And he hired a trainer. And the trainer comes up and looks at this thing and looks at it and walks around and says, walk, and the thing sits, and he says, sits, and the thing walks. So he goes over to his bag of tools and pulls out a Louisville Slugger and slams the thing in the head with all his might. And then he goes back and says to the world's remaining super jackass, do I have your attention?
Thank you.
And I think this is what the Americans have. They have not learned the lesson of the super jackass. They have been slammed repeatedly and still insist on looking at the world through their own particular viewpoint and refusing to believe that there are other interests in the world other than their own.
Thank you. Just one quick question for Mike. The hypothesis that some posit is the blowback hypothesis. That is, shame on the U.S. government for arming these guys in the 80s and 90s, but God, we didn't know that they were going to turn on us and fly these planes into the center. Is that a valid hypothesis in your opinion?
I'll try to be as brief in my answer as you were in your question. That's BS. Thank you.
Okay.
Utter nonsense.
Okay. Last question. If Bush wins the election, is there in place the means to proceed immediately with the impeachment of the entire administration?
I have an answer.
I guess we could, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. Actually, and From the Wilderness, for those of you who are subscribers, you'll know that we've been writing about that scenario for probably 2 years now. The foundation for the impeachment has been impeccably and legally laid by Congressman Henry Waxman of California, who, with House Government Reform Committee, or is it Governmental Affairs, Government Reform Committee, has been documenting all of the lies regarding the forged documents purportedly showing that Saddam Hussein was trying to purchase uranium from Niger, which tied directly into the Valerie Plum case, the outing of the former CIA officer by, we'll just speculate, Dick Cheney and Karl Rove, which are all impeachable and criminal offenses, including perjury. And that record's already in place. And I should add that there's a major historical precedent for this. In 1972, before the 72 election, the Republican National Committee, or the White House Plumbers Unit, burglarized the Watergate Hotel. Richard Nixon won the 1972 election in a landslide. But the legal work necessary to impeach Richard Nixon was already in place and had been well underway for several years before Nixon eventually resigned in 1974. That is a scenario that may be shaping up here. We may not, there's a lot of problems with the election, vote counting, everything else. We'll ask Cynthia about that. But the issue is this is a knockdown, drag-out fight, and I view the Democrats and the Republicans virtually as the Genovese or the Gambino crime family with little difference. But I think that scenario is in play.
Just for the audience that's interested in this issue, Carolyn Betts, who's going to be speaking here, is going to talk about options for redressing the quote-unquote criminal negligence or complicity of the Bush regime and what steps can be taken. Cynthia, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, yes, I do. There's food after we take our break or during a break. There's food available if you go through the exit sign that is over on that side of the room. And I would like to have Barry say a few words about his film and the time that we will have the opportunity to see the premiere of his film this evening.
Well,
tonight.
Thank you for the opportunity. When you're close to a production like this, it's hard for you to assess it, and I was having trouble assessing it. I'm acutely aware of certain lacks in this DVD. Some of them, well, they're all my responsibility. All the shortcomings are my responsibility, but some of them I didn't do directly, such as tape that didn't show up and so forth. But what has made me think that it's worth your coming to see it, there are two things. One is that since the master tape was completed, and up to including this day, I keep hearing references and statements that gain applause and questions are raised that people recognize as important, and I keep saying, yeah, I got that in, and I got that in, and I've got that one in and that one in, and it's quite a lineup of I don't know what you want to call it, not gratitude or pride, but fulfillment, that I have hit a lot of nails on the head, but in a popularized way. The second thing is that the reviews are coming in, and they're really, really good. People say it's brilliant. You can't see it once. You've got to see it 5 times and so forth. So, but I'm a very, very biased informant of this information. It runs 70 minutes and 18 seconds, and it does intertwine media criticism throughout, because I feel that is so important, and you've seen that here again this afternoon, and I gather that most people in this room share their anger and their frustration with the de facto censorship and the twisting of everything. I believe that if the media were really doing their job, I mean, if even one publication would do what the Washington Post did with Watergate, we would live in a different world. It could be broken open. The dam would break.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now we're going to entertain a couple of questions because we're running out of time, and I'm going to try and steal an additional 5 minutes, which means we'll have 10 minutes for your questions. And I said that I was going to have a bunch of questions, and I haven't asked a single one of my questions yet. So anyway, but in deference to you, because you are making this happen, go ahead, Commissioner McIlvaine.
Michael Springman, is it possible not only that visas were given fraudulently, but that identities were laundered or falsified using the U.S. Embassy?
You're saying that were visas issued fraudulently?
Yes.
And identities were falsified?
Or it says here laundered or falsified using the U.S. Embassy.
Well, I was in charge of the section. I had controls over the visa machines. I had the keys to the machines. The local staff were not alone with the machines. So any fraud would have had to have come out from outside the consulate. For example, if somebody presented me with a clean passport, and the guy's name was Joe Dokes, and the passport was in the name of Ragjit Singh or something, I would have no way of knowing this. We would check the identities of the visa applicants, both approved and refused, with the State Department's computer in Washington. And we would type in the name of the person and the date of birth and the place of birth and so forth and nationality. If we got a hit back, we had further questions, but we had no way of knowing if we had a false identity presented to us for a visa. My staff was very good at rooting this out. One fellow, an Indian, brought me a passport one time and said, "Mike, look at this." And I said, "What am I looking at?" And he says, "You see the last page of the passport?" And I said, "Yeah." "Well, take off your glasses and look real close." And somebody with a marvelous sense of touch had taken a razor blade and cut out the last page where the visa had been stamped refused. But you couldn't see it unless you looked at it almost under a magnifying glass. So, my staff was good at that. We checked with the State Department. If the State Department didn't have the bad guy's name in the file, we couldn't do anything. And as far as the visas that were given out, I resisted this. I had plenty of controls. I looked at the Immigration Act and the State Department regulations, and I did not, under any circumstances, simply say, "Oh, yeah, let's give this guy a visa. Let's make it a Keep America Beautiful visa." So, no. The only problems with the visa process in Jeddah was the fact that I was being ordered by government officials to issue visas to unqualified applicants who later turned out to be terrorists.
Go ahead.
Paul Thompson, what can you tell us about the oil pipeline negotiations a few weeks? The oil pipeline negotiations a few weeks before 9/11 with the Taliban, Russia.
Sure, yeah. In my book, I have a chapter there called Pipeline Politics, because this is oil is a very big issue, and as many of you may be aware, there were negotiations going on for several years regarding Unocal pipeline. There was a gas pipeline, there was an oil pipeline also to go through Afghanistan. Interestingly, and Michael Rupert helped me out in this, is that we find that the estimates of how much oil was in the Caspian Basin that would have gone out through this pipeline were extremely high in the early 90s. And right around the time of 9/11, by 2002, those numbers had changed dramatically, and they found out that so much of that oil actually wasn't there, that the estimates were wildly off. So I think that early on that was important. And as they realized that the oil, the estimates were shrinking every time they would do a new test, we can see that there's a shift of focus from intense interest in the Caspian region to intense interest in Iraq, where they knew that there was a lot of oil. So this, you can see this shift, especially in 2002. So certainly, before 9/11, I think that there was some going easy on the Taliban by people in the State Department and other people, because they were looking at the oil angle.
All right, one more, Michael Rupert. What is the mechanism by which the military inserted blips onto the civilian radar screen?
Well, specifically in terms of the technology, it's difficult to say. What we do know is that there are several press stories quoting Air Force personnel, specifically from the Northeast Air Defense sector, and I believe one was a story. Most of these came from the Toronto Star, papers that didn't publish in the U.S. But what it said was it was quoting interviews with Lieutenant Colonel Don Deskins and Colonel Robert Marr of the Northeast Air Defense sector about how they were wondering if the hijackings were part of the exercise of the drill. And then it says, instantly injects are purged from the radar screen. And then it refers later on. So what we have is a confirmation that there were actual injects placed onto FAA radar screens that day. Now, it's very interesting, parenthetically, and I know we're pressed for time, but it's very important to note that right after I made some presentations about the war games and broke some information about this, it was revealed that a supervisor at the FAA headquarters in Rome, New York, in Northeast Air Defense sector, had all 6 air traffic controllers involved on 9/11 sit down and talk about their recollections. into a tape recorder that day while it was still fresh. And right after I broke my stories, the New York Times reported that that tape was taken by that same supervisor, broken, crushed. The tape was cut into little pieces and scattered through various trash cans. But what I was able to do, I think, was make a pretty compelling case that it was an absolute torment for all of the air traffic controllers on 9/11 who were literally looking at their screens going, my God, which are the hijackings? Which is the drill? Where do we send the fighters?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's show our appreciation to the panelists for the wonderful work that they have done. And their courage. And I'm sure that the 911 Truth or Citizens Watch is going to make resources available on the internet, on the website.
There's lots of it already there.
Beautiful.
Okay, please don't disperse quite yet. Just have a brief announcement. Please stay with us. We have more presenters. This program was originally scheduled to go to 7. We may go to 7:30 because we got a late start if you want to stay on. The film that we'll be showing at 8 and at 9:30 is still on. Encourage your friends to come down if you've got access to a cell phone.